If someone asks me today, should I go to culinary school?
The answer is it depends. And it's a dreadful answer. I think it's such a truthful answer. I think higher education or an academic course is not for all. Not all of us need it. AI will kill creativity on the chef side. I think maybe on the one hand, I think there's clear risk for that. But on the other hand, it might actually provide more time for a chef, so the chef can spend more time on creativity. So I think both can be true at the same time. It is ultimately how you use as an individual, as an operator, how do you use the technology, and that's still in your own control. So collectively, I think we have a responsibility to think about the diet-related diseases our population is dealing with. And I think you cannot just say, well, it is the consumer who's responsible for the impact of what he or she does. At times I would jokingly say, can we teach you how to cook or how to bake? And say, check, got that down. We're really, really good at that. But if we don't teach you how to make a sustainable living out of that, then it's just an expensive hobby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fugitive Chefs podcast. Before I start today's episode, I would like to ask you a question. If somebody started culinary school today, what would they actually be learning? For decades, the answer was very simple. Learn to cook, learn discipline, work your way through the kitchens. But today, chefs are building startups, working in food companies, leading innovation teams, designing products, managing global organizations, teaching, consulting, creating content, and designing entirely new careers that barely existed a decade ago. So that brings us to the question, what should culinary education prepare people for? What capabilities will matter 10 years from now? And perhaps the biggest question of all, how do we prepare chefs not just for restaurants, but for the future of the entire food system? Today's guest is someone uniquely positioned to answer these questions. Michiel Bakker is the president of Culinary Institute of America. Before joining the CIA, he spent years leading global workplace experience at Google, where food became a part of much larger conversations around leadership, organizational design, sustainability, well-being, and innovation. Today, we are talking about the future of culinary education, the future of leadership, and what culinary expertise looks like in 2035. Michiel, welcome to Fugitive Chefs.
Thank you very much for having me, Farkan. It is wonderful to be with you.
No, really, thank you so much for accepting this. It's actually an exception because, as I told you before while we were preparing for this, it's mostly been chefs who have left restaurants. That's the whole premise of the podcast, right? But I feel with that, we can only get so far. And for me, what's interesting right now, what I'm exploring through Substack, through reading on LinkedIn, talking to people, having conversations, also with my current move into corporate food innovation, I'm seeing there's a much larger demand for a different sort of conversation, not just with the people who are pivoting, but also those like you who are partly responsible for shaping the future that awaits for the industry. So I wanted to ask you, Michiel, before anything else, let's start with 2035, because interestingly enough, I saw you shared a LinkedIn post just a few hours ago, and it said something about 2035 New Year's Eve. I love that image, the set that you've created with that post, because for me, I want to hear from you. When you imagine the food industry in 2035, not just from your role at CIA, but at large, because it's not your only attachment to the food industry that you've had that we'll speak about later. What do you hope and wish that has fundamentally changed around the food industry?
It's a good question. So I'll always start with the end in mind and work your way backwards. So when I think about the future, I would be the first ones to say, I wish I could predict the future, but unfortunately I can't. But I can think about scenarios. So I really like to think about from what are possible scenarios for where we might be as an industry, as an organization, as an individual, 10, 20, 30 years from now. And in my role, I really use this version of Vision 2035 to have people imagine what the possibilities are. So when I think about the possibilities for our industry in 2035, I hope it's going to be just as much focused on great food that bring people together, as well as great culinary professionals, great food and beverage professionals that continue to enable that. But I do believe that the world will be slightly, if not significantly different. We will be more enabled by technology. And I think as AI technology will help us to do more, I do believe that there will be an even greater longing for human connections, which can be facilitated by great meals provided by great chefs. And I believe as well is that our world would be more personalized as well. But I think there's some tension in that system as well, because on the one hand, I do believe that personalization, customization is helpful. And at the same time, I believe actually having just meals together where you eat together without having your individualized, personalized meal, I hope it's going to be a proper balance of all of that. But I am very, very bullish that our future will continue to be really engaging. It will be fueled by great food. And I think to a large extent, it will be more of what it is as of today. Because on a 10-year time horizon, the world will change less than ultimately I think we believe or think it might actually evolve.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I mean, it also has more value because of coming from you, because I mean, you are part of an ecosystem which is shaping a lot of at least the academic side of it, but not only just early professionals, because CIA has people who are not just getting the education, but also imparting education. So it's interesting what you think about it. I was very curious to hear how you think about that. But for you, Michael, because you also mentioned in the links in that it's sort of an abstract exercise. Like, I mean, futurescaping or forecasting, it's a very abstract thing at some sort. It has a mechanism to it, but it does help you make better decisions. And for you or people like you in leadership positions, why do you think the exercise of this sort of forecasting or imagining this future is necessary in a role like yours?
I think it's twofold. One is you have to be aware of the potential risks that you might face today, tomorrow, a month, a year, a quarter, or whatever it might be in the future. So if you think in scenarios about the futures, you might ultimately identify common themes that no matter whether it's scenario 1, 5, or 7, here are the risks that you have to be aware of and potential response to. So that is if you think about the doom and gloom component. If you are very optimistic and you want to pursue all these great new opportunities, I think the same methodology holds true as well. So if you think about all these opportunities, from what are common themes or what are common characteristics, common competencies you need to pursue in order to be ready for the future and be able to capture the opportunities. So I find actually dreaming, envisioning the future is very helpful, because it both helps you to think about risk coming your way, but more importantly, opportunities that are not necessarily in your face today, that become clear when you dream about the future, and then you can ultimately evolve your organization to be able to pursue those.
And talking about those risks, like mitigating those risks and opportunities, as you call them, what are in your position today when you look at that future? Just the last question on this, maybe just one specific thing that excites you the most right now, looking 10 years ahead, and the one that concerns you the most on those two sides of the opportunity and risk.
Let me just use the easy one. AI, artificial intelligence.
Okay.
I think it has.
Which one is it?
strong-
Is it a concern or the opportunity?
It's both ends.
Right. Yes.
Because I think the opportunities are tremendous. I think as our industry is a very margin challenged industry, anything that we can find or use in that will help an operator to run at a higher margin will help both the operator, will help the consumer. You all benefit from that. And that therefore AI will provide a variety of opportunities that we cannot even imagine as of today. So that is the positive side. I think on the risk side, there is this, risk of we becoming more dependent on just an easy answer machine or an easy exploration machine, and that might enable us to maybe lose a little of critical thinking capabilities, or we just don't validate what an AI model tells us sufficiently enough, and we just become too dependent and just getting that easy answer. So that is the risk in itself. Or you have this risk of believing that something else, this technology solution, will provide you with the answers or with the solutions that potentially should be more driven by or be enabled by humans. For example, creativity. So if you think about, this notion of AI will kill creativity on the chef side, I think maybe on the one hand, I think there's clear risk for that. But on the other hand, it might actually provide more time for a chef, so the chef can spend more time on creativity. So I think both can be true at the same time. And it's not the thing in itself. It's ultimately how you use as an individual, as an operator, how do you use the technology, and that's still in your own control.
It's interesting. I mean, it's already a great start to the conversation because for me, this is what I wanted to start with because I felt like if we just start with what CIA is doing, what is your job as a president? How did you get there? I feel it just it fits into the idea a person would have opening this episode looking at Michael Bakker, the president of CIA, is going to speak. But I feel it's important to bring people into the context that yes, there is a job side to it, but that at the end, this job that you have today contributes to an industry which has impacts on many fronts. And I feel that's what for me is interesting to highlight with the conversations we've had before preparing for this interview. It was what surprised me the most is how much of your work, from what I understand, what I hear from you, what I see on your LinkedIn as well, is around not just doing your job but also preparing the groundwork for it because it's dynamically changing the industry. So let's just rewind a little now that we've set the tone for the conversation. Let's get back to how did you get here, Michael? Because most people who know you today, they know you as a president of CIA, but your path has been anything but conventional, right? You worked in hospitality, you worked in Google, education, you also worked in Orbis over here in Netherlands. And looking back, tell us about how did you get here and what sort of experiences, what part of these experiences has shaped what you do today?
Yeah, it's this really interesting mixture, I would say, between I was very, very driven, and at the same time, I allowed life to happen at various moments of time in my life. So from a very young age, I knew I was destined for the hospitality, the hotel industry, but just knew it. And don't ask me how I knew it, because I grew up in a family that had no affiliation with hospitality. But I was bitten by the bug early on, so I did everything I could to be admitted to one of the hotels, because in the Netherlands, the one in Maastricht, had 4 just incredible fun years over there. And then I would say lesson number 1, life happens. I met up with a person who I'd met during one of my years in high school, an exchange student from the United States.
Okay.
We met up a couple of years after graduation, and life happens, fall in love. And a year later, and I married with an American in upstate New York. And I was able to start in the hospitality industry. I started with Westin Hotels and Resorts in Atlanta. Then I had 17 amazing years with Starwood, 15 of those in the US. And my final 2 years I did food and beverage for Starwood in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And if I had followed my expected path, I would have stayed in Brussels, Belgium for 4 or 5 years, make it back to the US, and continue to work for Starwood or for another hotel company. And as I always say, be open for the unexpected. A year into my journey in Brussels with Stout, I get an email from Google where I was interested in having a conversation with them about this new role at Google to lead their food at work program and be based in California. I knew Google, never heard of the food at work program, started the conversation, and a year later, I'm from California and I become responsible to lead with an amazing leadership team Google's internal food and beverage operations. Did it for 12 years, grew with the organization. When I started, the team and I were responsible for serving 35,000 booths. It's truly delicious, nutritious food all over the world. And I would say by the time I left, we were probably at 190,000 individuals on the Google or Alphabet side that we got to serve. So an amazing journey, loved it. And then in my final year, I was made aware of this fascinating opportunity at the Culinary Institute of America. So during my time at Google, I had worked with the CIA, knew of them, truly appreciated what they did, but never ever thought of aspiring to become a college president. I've never worked in higher education, wasn't on my bucket list. But as I was open to something new, started the conversation, and a year later, I became the 6th president of the Culinary Institute of America, which is this wonderful organization, 80 years old, and basically an organization that is now preparing the next generation of culinary, food, beverage, and hospitality leaders with campuses in Hyde Park, upstate New York, 60 miles of New York City, in California and Napa, as well as San Antonio, Texas, and in Singapore. So 4 campuses and over 3,500 students, and we offer associates, bachelor's, and master degree programs. And I would say, but wait, there is more. Because in addition to that, we have a variety of what I would call side businesses. We do food and beverage classes for consumers, We have retail, we have consultancy service. So we're a little bit more than just a great college for the next generation of food and beverage leaders. We are basically serving the broader industry as well. And what I really enjoy about my role, Perkin, is that I now get to work with the leadership team, with our amazing board of trustees, to think about from what is our journey over the next 10 years. And as we are a non-for-profit organization, we're really focused about into helping the industry, helping individual professionals, and thinking through all of that in how will the world change. And maybe going back to from why do I love to think about the future? I feel this true responsibility as a leader of this type of organization to think through. We need to prepare our students for what they will encounter during their next 20, 30, 40 years in the industry. So it's easy peasy to say we're going to teach you, we're going to train you of what it was 10, 15 years ago. But if the world is going to change a gazillion times, maybe what it was and we're in what you needed to be successful 15 years ago might not help you to be successful today, let alone by 2035. So an organization like ours, any higher education organization, has to think about from what future scenarios are possible, what are coming themes, and how you might better prepare the next generation of students for that. And then maybe one more element to going back to AI. I have no idea what the capabilities are going to be AI-wise a year, 5, 10 years from now. But one of the things I deeply believe in is that no matter what the capabilities are, as a leader, as a professional, you have to be able to critically think. And that therefore we have to teach, train, and prepare our students to be critical thinkers. That would be one. Or another one, I have no idea what the balance will be, but I'm deeply convicted that over the years to come, as a leader, as an operator in our space, you will not only have to ultimately guide, support, and lead the leaders, but at the same time, you will work with AI agents and you will work with robots. And that therefore it's no longer just about can you be a great people leader, but similarly, can you be a great AI agent leader? Can you think about the possibilities with robots? And how do you ultimately orchestrate those 3 different types of workforces going forward? And I'm not saying over here that I believe it will be the same for everybody, but I find it impossible to think that as an F&B operator, you will not use some form of AI agents or some form of automation over the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm not here to judge what is better or what is worse. I just want to make sure that students who join us tomorrow or a year from now are set up for long-term success. And they will figure it out what they believe is the best mix in their environment for their business.
Yeah, and that's very exciting for me because you spoke about very direct examples, right? Like let's say AI agents, for example. But from your role, of course, you can know enough about it, know what has to be done with it, but you can't just get granular on that sense because, as you say, you are mentoring or helping the leadership team by itself, which has to then find their own solutions, which are very subjective to the person's context, to the business's context. So for me, it's very interesting. How does somebody who has worked in hotels, which broadly work on systems, Starwood being one of the biggest hotel chains, do depend on a system. If you work at the city I grew up in Bombay, a Marriott, for example, would have SOPs which are done by the hotel group at some point, and people have looked at it. And from that, you moved into technology. So for me, what's interesting in all this link in the position you're today is the time at Google. I feel that's very fascinating because over there you were doing food and workplace, but the more I read about it, it seems like it's not just food because they also have workplace experience, well-being, transportation, design, sustainability, culture, all of these things, and food fits in there. But in today's organization where you are, food is the core of it. But what does that environment like Google, which is a tech company, where you were before AI was maybe as big as it is today, what part of your leadership comes from being in an environment like that where food wasn't the core, but it does make the whole picture of workplace experience fuller in that sense? What shapes your leadership from there?
I think it's a combination of when you have worked at Google, it's many of us, including myself, you get to drink the Kool-Aid of actually believing in the impossible. You're basically being exposed to people who continue to think about moonshots. It's from what are the impossible challenges and how might you make the impossible possible? And the core belief actually is not so much that you will be able to achieve all known shots, but if you set extraordinary, audacious, ambitious goals, you will go further than if you set goals that are relatively easy to achieve. So in our world, like if you set a very bold goal and you achieve 70%, that 70% was better than if you set a very small goal and you achieved 110%. That's an interesting mindset because your notion would be from you've not been successful, but if you think about the impact or the final result, being bold and going as far as you can get is probably better than just being very risk averse and just looking at incremental change. So I think that as well. I think the second one is Google was and is a very data-driven organization. But even for a data-driven organization, there were a number of things where we just knew that even without the data to really to back it up, there were some, I would say, human truth. So one of our human truth was that we felt that we were better together. And we believe as an organization is that bring people together over a good meal, a good lunch or a good breakfast, magic will happen. So even if you would spend quite a bit of money on ultimately making that happen, there wasn't necessarily that we needed to prove that 17 of the innovations at Google per year were a direct result of a conversation that was facilitated in one of our cafes. But there was this, by just seeing it, this qualitative feedback and this deep conviction of our leaders and our broader just workforce. We just believed in it. Offer amazing food for free at multiple touch points in an office. You ultimately get to the responsibility as the employer as well to think through how do you ultimately make this delicious food available, but without exposing people to the risk of overeating, because too much of really good stuff is still not good for you. Yep. So actually we became this working lab where we've spent a lot of time and focus on enabling our workforce to be deliciously energized, and at the same time to think through how do you do it in a very libertarian organization, because in our environment it wasn't as much about us telling you what was good for you or not. Because if you wanted to drink, what I would say the good stuff that wasn't really good for you when you drank it at high frequency or large quantities, we made it available, but we set up the system in such way for you that's the better choice was the easiest choice. So in addition to thinking about how do you ultimately sell or make available more of your good stuff, you'll learn about the responsibility you have for your workforce, the impact you have with what you do on ultimately your broader sort of stakeholders, suppliers, the community. So you became ultimately way more, I would say, aware of the impact that you made both intentionally and unintentionally. And when you've been exposed to that type of environment for a great number of years, you cannot unlearn it. Neither would I want to unlearn that. So what I now bring from my time at Google to this organization is believe that there's so much more we can do. There's so much more that we should do just based on the fact that organizations, individuals look at us as a leader in our space. And therefore, with that opportunity, you have a responsibility as well. But you have to do it in a way where you don't become you know it all, or I'm going to tell you what you can and cannot do. It's really about from how do you enable an ecosystem to come along, but with a clear perspective that you articulate and share, but clearly as well as that, just because I had this perspective doesn't mean it is my final perspective, or that I cannot be challenged, or that I cannot evolve. But what I've learned is that the clearer I am in how I think or what I think, the easier it is for others to recalibrate me or to tell me, that's cute, but you're wrong, or have you thought about this? And that therefore being very open and being very transparent, but being willing to show up with what you think, you can grow faster, you can evolve faster, and I think you can help an ecosystem and partners to come along faster as well. Yeah.
And that's the part of leadership, right, that you bring from seeing this at Google. But in terms of the industry itself, let's not just say culinary, but the hospitality at large. When you look at, you can say, of course, a tangible technology per se is what we can take from tech and apply to hospitality. But is there something else about that, the lessons from technology that hospitality should borrow? top of my head, I think about change management, for example. Technology, I mean, you're talking about AI, how it changes in years, but honestly, it's every week there's something new with Anthropic or with OpenAI, something new is coming up. And I feel they have somehow had to learn this change management because of the amount of technologies I've seen in my lifespan. How do you think, is there something that there are tangents that we can draw with technology and hospitality?
I think yes. Clearest one being is like tech companies never finish a product.
Okay.
They're always better in data. So if you think about Gmail, Gmail was developed a great number of years ago, and for years, if you looked at actually the logo, it was in beta. Because basically you can continuously iterate and make it bigger and better versus say, this is the final product. And I think from an hospitality experience perspective, we constantly iterate, we constantly adapt to our environment. So that will be one where we continue to learn from each other as well. I think a more complicated one would be is to think through from what is the responsibility you have as a provider, like a tech provider or a food and beverage provider. And I think that's where it gets at times interesting, tricky, whatever term it might be. So on the one hand, you can make the argument that as a great food and beverage provider, that might be a CPG company, it might be a restaurant operator, it might be a hospitality hotel operator. You can make the argument is that I'm just going to make available what my clientele is asking for. Or do you show up as well with that is true? And I have a responsibility as well to think about the long-term impact if my consumer consumes my product on a regular basis as well. And I think we can collectively potentially take a little bit more ownership about for the long-term implications and consequences of what we get to do as well. I'll give you an example. So collectively, I think we have a responsibility to think about the diet-related diseases individuals and our population is dealing with. And I think you cannot just say, well, it is the consumer, it is the customer who's responsible for the impact of what he or she does. I think, yes, they have a responsibility, but at the same time, we are all contributors and participants in creating this ecosystem. And we cannot just say as an operator, as a part of it isn't us, it is somebody else. So how do you actually ensure that as we make available wonderful food and beverage experiences, that we continue to maintain the right to do that, our license to operate, and at the same time ultimately make it a shared responsibility of society, government, operators, and consumers to make sure that we basically change the trajectory that we're on.
And I would love to move into education, Michael, in the sense that, I mean, CIA, I do not know if this is a question that comes to you very often, but if I could open my LinkedIn, Instagram, the podcast community chat, there's a question that comes a lot. And I believe that is a question that the whole business side of CIA, if I'm imagining there's a design sprint that you hold to design what comes up for CIA now, it might be the core of it. So if someone asks me today, should I go to culinary school? I mean, it's a very difficult question to ask to you because, I mean, you are the face of CIA today. But let's think about the student side of us things. And if they sincerely came up to you and asked, like, should I go to culinary school? Not CIA specifically, but should education be the path I take to enter this industry? Before I add any more, I have like some follow-ups and layers to it, but I really want to hear your sincere answer to that question.
I think the answer is it depends. And it's a dreadful answer. I think it's such a truthful answer. I think higher education or an academy course is not for all. Not all of us need it. And that therefore I would never tell you that all of us who want to have amazing careers in culinary or food and beverage should go to college, but with us or somebody else. So I think that is one. Two, I think the answer will evolve if the offerings evolve. Because I think as of today, college degree is 2 or 4 years, depending whether it's an associate expert's degrees or the country you take it in. But imagine that over the years to come, educational institutions actually become more diversified. And you can say, I can take short-form courses that become stackable credentials. and it becomes a little bit more of either specifically focus on techniques or on specific cuisines, or maybe a little bit more on leadership development, technology, or social media. So I think there is this need to customize what it is you actually going to college for, more so to your specific needs. So you have that. I think the third one is, if you believe you should go to a culinary school or college, and then assume that when you're done, you immediately can become a sous chef or an executive chef, that's just not how it works. Yeah. Ultimately, you have to learn the craft. You have to learn ultimately how to deal with a variety of different sides. I do believe that for several, going to a culinary school or college will accelerate your career, and it might provide you with a much higher ceiling further down the stream. That's short term. It might make the biggest impact that you hope you are looking for. And then some actually learn more in different formats. So I believe an organization like ours and other higher educations will actually become more diversified solution providers. So if I can maybe just give you how I think about it. So as of today, we offer associates, bachelor's, and master's degrees. My conviction is that within a short number of years, we will offer short form courses as well through our sister organization, the Academy. And that therefore, if you are high school students and you say, I don't want to go to college, but I want to learn a bit, we have a different solution for you through the Academy. Or if you are a career converter, because we don't really talk about that group either. So I think the new generation, the Gen Z, the Gen Alphas, they won't have just one amazing long-term career in one industry. Just based on the change they're going to be faced with, they might actually have 4, 5, 6 very distinctly different careers in different industries throughout the time that they work. So how do you help somebody who's 35 who has a bachelor's degree and moves from industry 1 to an industry? They're not going to go to the college for like 2 or 4 years, but they might need some additional technical training in order to enter a different industry at a higher level. Or if you think about people who are re-entering the industry after they've raised a family, or hope you see the U.S. private base, for example, military veterans. They've served the country, they retire from the military, they use their GI Bill to actually to get ready for their second career. For those, there's so many options, but I think the format and the duration and the methodology is going to change, and that's where I believe like AI will play a role as well. So long-winded answer is that college is not needed for all, and at the same time it will continue to be an extraordinary accelerator for those for who it is truly a great solution.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think we need the long answer, because at the end of the day, that's why I asked you for a podcast, right? Because I feel there's so much content going around in terms of a short reel or TikTok, where just denying or accepting or saying yes to culinary school, no to culinary school is just too small of a format to actually accept the reality of the situation, how it is, and how, as you said, it has to innovate in the sense that it has to make sense for the people in it. And I really like the part that you said about the younger professionals will have multiple careers. I think we already see that with some people, and currently they are the outliers of the common world, not just in our industry. And it's nice that education itself is transforming to accept of that rather than rejecting that they are the exceptions. And I'm curious over there, Michael, when you say about these stackable degrees, or you talk about these micro credentials, or these new formats of how education has to address these realities, are you taking inspiration from some sort of, I don't know, some discipline of education, or is just something that you're seeing across the board happening with, I don't know, business administration and other professions?
So I always believe you learn the most from either adjacent industries or very different industries. Okay. So I think the easy peasy default is I can look at my colleagues in the industry, and you look at the most innovative and say, I'm going to do more of that. But it is pure incrementalism. But for example, I think it's fascinating to think about other industries with similar instructional settings like ours. For example, art colleges or medical schools, and for them to think through what it is that they're doing to train the next generation students as well. And what can we learn from them that might ultimately make it cheaper or faster to train individuals in our type of environment as well. And similar to, I think many of us are lifelong learners, but sometimes you only need 4 hours and you want to do it on your time, on your device. That might be one. Sometimes you want to be actually in a cohort because part of your learning is actually having conversation with others, in sharing conversation and agreement, second, this happens to me, what do you think? So I think the way we learn is very much dependent on where we're at in our career, what it is you want to learn, and how your learning style. I think the other one I deeply believe in is that it is so easy to always focus on the next generation, to say Gen Alpha is different than Gen Z and Gen Z different than Gen X. And I think all true. But when I look at whether it's countries in Europe or countries of states in the US, like it or not, for many, many years to come, we will have an ever larger diversity of workers. We'll have many, many more older people because people live longer. They will probably look for part-time jobs under 65 or 70. So how do you ultimately train a 7-year-old versus an 18-year-old? And the learning styles could not be more different. So if we need to think, oh, guess what? There's going to be one style, and if we have to adapt to that, that won't work. So therefore, I think about like the 5 core ingredients for an organization like ours, which is content, faculty members, our alumni network, industry partners, and then ultimately distribution channels. And then to think from how can you repackage those in such a way where it would resonate for you, where it would resonate for a 16-year-old, or where it would resonate for an 80-year-old, because that is our presence, that is our future. And we will become more agile in basically repackaging those core ingredients to formats that really work for individuals with different learning styles and where those learners actually are and sometimes you will learn a little bit more at work. It might be on the go and it might be at home. So I think the world is going to continue to evolve at an ever faster pace. And as an educational partner, if your aspiration is to be a lifelong learning and development partner, you have to evolve the way you show up, where you show up, and how you show up affordable and accessible as well to an ever larger population.
Yeah, and it's interesting, but this does make the whole designing of it. I mean, of course, it makes it challenging to be able to trying to fit everybody in or customizing in a sense that it does make sense for everybody's context, Michael. But I was very interested in what you said in the beginning about when you were giving the example of how AI agents would be different and possibly you need people who are good at managing those AI agents or making use of them better. So that's again becomes some sort of, if we call it a soft skill, or it's not exactly a cooking technical skill. So when you look at the associate program, let's say this associate program innovates every year, it adds new content, renews itself. From all of it, if you had to break down the structure for a bachelor's or a more of a, like a longer degree program, what parts of it you would say people have to learn which are beyond the technical cooking skill? What are the things that you would not like to remove or refuse to lose from the program, which are possibly more skills to do with the, I don't know, personality rather than the cooking of the product itself?
Yeah, so I think the first core group is the hard skills. From can you chop an onion? Can you dice an onion? Can you chop salad and all that fun stuff? I think the second and third category, first and foremost, are the soft skills. And how do we make sure that no matter what generation you're from, is that you are equipped and enabled to deal with an ever-changing customer base as well. And I think as we become more digitally enabled, we need to spend more and more time on making sure that our students, no matter where they're at, are able to have amazing conversations with people from different backgrounds as well. That is a much more interesting challenge today than maybe what it was 5-10 years ago. Similar to how do you ultimately prepare students to become great people leaders, soft skills? How do you enable them to become great AI agent leaders, which is more of a tech skill? So you have all of that. And I think the third big bucket for us is it's the business of food and beverage. So, at times I would jokingly say, can we teach you how to cook, perhaps to bake? And say, check, we've got that down. We're really, really good at that. But if we don't teach you how to make a sustainable living out of that, then it's just an expensive hobby.
Yeah.
And what I find is that as the culinary profession is such an art-driven profession, is that we need to make sure that these professionals are equipped with the right food and beverage skill sets as well. And what I've learned in our organization, because we started in 1946 as an amazing culinary trade school, we focus amazingly well and deep onto the craft and the art, but a little less about the science. And as you know, culinary science is a real thing.
Yeah.
And, I can teach you the tricks, but without you understanding the science, it's just a trick. But with the science, it becomes much more interesting because you now understand what happens is when you add heat to a dish or to an ingredient. So we need to double down on the science as well as the business. And the business is a combination of, if you sign the wrong lease for your new restaurant, no matter how hard you work afterwards, you will never be successful. If you think about what makes a restaurant successful these days, it's no longer just, can you create a great menu and can you cook? It is, what is your presence in social media? How do you ultimately deal with the verse and stitch? Your interior design? What is your service style and music? There's so many more aspects of ultimately running restaurants today, and that is part of our business focus as well. So we're actually recalibrating of what we teach to building upon our legacy of the craft and the art. Now it's to spend more time on the site and the most time on the business of food and beverage. And that's really fun because if I think about, a traditional restaurant, so when I grew up, it was really about, can you make a single unit restaurant successful? And it was really about the on-premise dining experience, the service and all of that stuff. But nowadays you have to think about, in addition to on-premise, takeout, delivery, retail, social media presence, as well as event catering. So same concept, you now have to think about the impact on your kitchen to make sure is that you set yourself up for being successful at these different revenue streams versus just to think about one revenue stream. And then if you want to grow, you have to think about how do you scale one concept, or how can you become a multi-concept operator? And what I find is that some of our, very craft and art-driven individuals, they really love to be actually in the kitchen and focus on that. And they don't necessarily early on see the broader picture or believe that's really for them. But going back to, you have to be there for whether it's at the beginning or midway, become the lifelong learning and development partner, and therefore we might actually, from a college experience, focus more on the craft and the art. But as you start to progress in your career, we might be your lifelong learning and development partner that you can go back to for an evening class, for an online class, or for a weekend training program. Because I think as our world continues to evolve faster and faster, all of us will continue to have to spend more time in staying on top of our industry or relearning or learning new stuff. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting because for me, when I heard about this, I'm sort of envious also because we did not have these things growing up, or I did not have. There was no vision behind the education you were receiving. It was sort of copy paste of what has worked for people, mostly also even educationers giving out what they can because that has worked for them in their case, but not really forecasting. And I feel, especially when I look at myself growing in the context and culture of a very competitive country, a competitive population culture where you have to be a master of something, whereas I rather preferred being the jack of all arts of some sorts, which is a derogatory thing in some sense. But I think it does help at the end of the day, because what you said about food science and business and knowing these aspects, and especially when you step into a role like mine, where in a big food industry where they are admiring just the skill you bring to the table on cooking, but the only way you can have a voice on the table and actually get your ideas to move up the leadership team is by knowing the language around. Even if you don't know the intricacies of food science, if you speak the language and understand the logic behind these things, if you understand business, as you said, you are securing your skill set as well. If you have a restaurant which you don't know the business of, as you said, your skill set could be great, but it won't be relevant because you won't have a place to cook from. And that's super interesting for me. But that also brings us to I think it's a constant argument, a debate within the industry, right? The degree versus experience. What you were kind of talking to us about is how the degree has to accompany the experience at which stage of the career you are, what do you need. But then again, that's the solution we can give to the future generations. But for the current generations of, I think, the people you recruit and the people in your team who are imparting this education, what I see with other education institutions that I've spoken to, I've been part of one, is that the tension lies where you have the best chefs who you would want to be in your school imparting the education, but they've never completed their higher education, which is now somehow the legal compliance that this professor needs to have that degree to be able to impart a degree. So it becomes a tussle between the degrees or the paperwork they have compared to the experience they have. How do you sort of balance this? Because there are incredible teachers who have built their knowledge through experience rather than academic qualifications. How can we balance these two worlds, either actualize them or help shape policies or laws around that they permit no loss of this sort of work experience?
Yeah, I think the best way to answer it for you today is to think about, and I know it's not necessarily the clearest articulation, but I basically look at our faculty in three different categories. We have what we would call lab faculty. Those are our chefs, pastry chefs, bakers, who actually are teaching the profession in a kitchen, in a bake shop, in a pastry shop. Then you have liberal arts professors. People basically are teaching liberal arts and all the different subjects that fall under that name. And then you have people who are teaching the business component, who are part of our food business school. So we have different requirements for faculty who are going to teach either in the food business school or liberal arts than we have for our applied subjects.
Right.
And there, what we basically do is that we value your practical experience probably more than maybe your educational background. And at the same time, we help those who maybe show up without a social bachelor's degree. We help them to ultimately get their social bachelor's degree as they teach. So to me, like, it doesn't have to be the same for all, because they're basically bringing different experiences and different bodies of knowledge to the table. The other one I would also say, going back to what you're saying about individuals like you, one, I think, of the broadest opportunities for chefs is to think a little bit more about their transferable skills and experiences that they can bring to roles outside of the kitchen. So I deeply believe that chefs are extraordinarily well equipped to lead larger teams and larger operations because they've been able to work in high pressure environments and with all kinds of individuals under high pressures. So it has to deal with how do you see yourself, and ultimately what skills do you bring to your next role and to your next employer, and how do you tell that story?
Yeah.
And one of the things I've always learned is so interesting when you ask an individual, imagine that my role today will disappear overnight. Where do you see me next and why? And when you ask this to people who have worked with you or know you well, then sometimes you come up with the most interesting answers. And I'll give you a personal example. So when I worked at Google, I asked that questions to one of the senior leaders of the organization who me know well. And he told me, for Michael, if your role disappears or you want to do something very different, you should work for a data center organization.
Okay.
And I said, why do you see me there? Because that's nothing to do with what I've studied for. I have no experience with that. But what he said is that the way I've seen you run an organization, you're really, really good at scaling organizations. And our data organization will continue to scale. So what he made me realize is that sometimes we default to, I am a food and beverage dude, or I'm an hospitality leader, and I see myself as such, and I can only look at those type of roles going forward, or those organizations, whereas your skill set is much broader because you are creative, you've proven that you can actually work with people from all walks of life under very high pressure settings. And that therefore there's so many more things you can do, but it has to start with your being able to start to articulate those kinds of skills and experience you've built, and then being actually able and willing to articulate it to somebody else.
Yeah, it's a journey. I feel it's super inspiring what you say, and it's something I already subconsciously apply, and it's something I tell to people because I feel I agree with what you say. I think chefs bring a lot of things on the table, but I think they are sometimes not even aware of it. Sometimes not even aware of what they bring is so, like, I don't know, thinking on your feet or coming up with things at the heat of the moment is something that in hotel, for example, situation management is what, when I was in working for Hyatt, that's what we valued the most, other than speaking English at some point in a hotel in Bombay. Somebody who can handle a situation and calm down a guest who's super angry. I think that's a skill. But these skills, because there are no words to it, because there are no degrees or titles to it, people do not know how to even first of all identify them. And the second, the most important part, you said, to how do you communicate that? How do you bring that into an interview rather than focusing on, I do not have the masters that you've enlisted in your LinkedIn as a requirement, but I have this that I applied in my previous project. I feel that story is what's required. But coming back to the question, Michael, about culinary educators, because interestingly enough, I work in food and beverage. My partner is into learning design. She works in instructional design, especially with AI and German governments currently. And I see a lot. I mean, through her, I understand more about this world because I didn't even know there's work around instructional design and learning design. And then I think about a role of a teacher who's teaching, as you said, the third category of teacher who are bringing lived experiences with them, where they're not necessarily bringing a formal degree. But for you, what makes between these three categories of educators, what is common between them that make them good educators? Do they have to be primarily great practitioners, or is it not the same to be very good at something? Or let me frame it like this: being very good at something, the greatest butcher, for example, is the greatest butcher the greatest teacher to teach butchering in that sense?
I'm still learning
Yeah.
the best answers for this kind of question because I'm still relatively new to higher education. I think my answer today would be it's that it starts with your excitement about teaching somebody something new. Because even if you are the best in class in whatever your area of specialty is, but if you don't enjoy teaching that to somebody else, it will never work. So I would always default to a person who just thrives by enabling somebody else to become better and just having that spark and that ability just to see the potential in somebody else. The rest will follow. And that therefore a great educator is somebody who just thrives when he or she gets to unlock the potential in somebody else. And you see that. You can clearly see it, and you hear it from students as well. Students sniff it out is when they're being taught by somebody who cares deeply for them as an individual, who just care deeply for your future success. And they can actually be very demanding and very firm, and at times just really, really hard. But the moment they pick up on the fact that you care and that you want them to become better, that's where magic really happens.
Yeah. And just conscious of time, Michael, before we wrap this up, I wanted to ask you, because there's a part of research I've been doing apart from the podcast, talking to mostly people like you who are leading education, but also people who are managing chefs within organizations, because it happens to be most people who manage chefs, from what I've seen, my personal company and others across food companies, are not really chefs themselves. And it becomes very difficult for them to identify what kind of skill set do they want to bring into their company. And that's where it ties together with the idea that you spoke about, the stackable credentials, etc. So I'm trying to call them, within my research, as I'm framing it, I'm calling it capabilities. It's like a capability you bring as a chef and you can learn. But for the early career professionals who are possibly still to decide if they want to go to culinary school or not, they're probably trying their first 2 years in restaurants. What sort of, if we call them capabilities, what sort of capabilities, and I know this answer is going to be very respective to, as you said, if they want to get into content, communication, business, whatever that is, but what capabilities related to the industry and the way it's evolving would you encourage early career professionals should look for, possibly while they're scanning degrees or education possibilities for themselves?
Yeah. The first one, get your hand dirty.
Yeah.
So get involved in food. So touch the fruit, smell the fruit, taste the fruit, and just really learn as much as possible for the longest period of time. Like, I don't think you can learn food just by reading books or watching videos. It's, go to a farm, work with a fisherman, and just that will be really the starting point. I think the second one, it's you learn by doing. It's almost like the more time you spend in various food environments, the more benefits you will actually gain over the years to come. And to me, it's so interesting is that nobody blinks that if you want to be for example, an Olympic medalist, you know that you're going to be spending years preparing for that one competition because you understand it just takes time. It's no different from being best in class in your own profession. It requires lots and lots of work. You have to actually have the tenacity, the persistence, and the resilience in order to get it done. So I think it's the competency of sticking it out. I think the third one is expose yourself to as many different leaders as possible. Like one of the beauties of my type of environment is that I think there's 60 different chefs, and that therefore as a student during your time here, you get exposed to all their different personalities. And it's not that one is better, particularly what you learn of two things. One is there is not one perfect way. And two, you get to learn actually what works better for you because you get exposed to 50 different chefs. And that therefore invest in your own future. It's almost like from the more you invest in the fundamentals early on in your career, the more you will benefit from longer term. Like, I wish if I could do my career all over again, and I've always worked in front of house, I wish that I would have spent more time in the kitchen because I think you learn more about food and beverage by ultimately touching the product versus just serving the product. And that while it might at times feel it's hard work and you have to work maybe on the times where your friends are off, all true. But if you take the long-term time horizon, it will pay off in so many different ways. And I think whoever that's involved in food early on, it's the benefits and the joys are just extraordinary.
No, thank you so much, Michael. I mean, I think everybody who's listening to this, the people especially who listen to the podcast and communicate with it, I feel a lot of this, what you've shared, resounds with them. I think there's a lot of looming doubts about culinary education I think many people confuse it with mistrust, but I think it's more than that because every environment, every culture, every context, every maturity of the market where culinary education is being imparted is so different. It tries to evolve with the demands of the market, and that's become a little confusing. But it's interesting to see not just what's available right now through CIA and others, but also what you shared about the envisioning process that you said. But any closing comments for you, Michael? I mean, from my side, I would love to hear for you. We started with the imagining the future, right? We talked about 2035. For you, what is it that has to change for you to sit in 2035 at the New Year's Eve meal and say, we did it? What would make you feel proud?
I think it's the more we work together as partners in the industry, the greater the likelihood of success. And at the same time, it's your mindset as well. I'm very optimistic about the future. And if I think about food, so one is, no matter what happens, we always want to eat. We enjoy eating together. So it is an industry that will always be there. The sky is the limit. The best is yet to come. But you have to believe in it. You have to see it. And you have to contribute to it.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. This conversation was very necessary. I feel that I've completed the loop with not just talking with chefs who are transitioning, but also people who are helping and accompanying and preparing for people have kind of navigated this path without having a structure that accompanies in the ways they need it more than how it has been imagined education before. So I feel if it was difficult before, and if people have made it, I think now the chances even higher when culinary education itself is customizing itself to the need of the generation. So thank you so much, not just for coming to the conversation, but for what you're doing for the industry.
And thank you for what you do for all of this as well, and bringing people together and ultimately having these open conversations with so many industry professionals. It truly makes a difference.
It's been a pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Talk soon.
And to everyone listening, if you enjoyed the conversation, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a rating or review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. It helps more people discover these stories and helps grow the community around fugitive chefs. If you know another chef who's questioning what comes after restaurants, share this episode with them. It might just be what they're looking for. Until next time, thanks for listening.